If you always had to be the strong one in your family, watch this picture. Picture a house where the lights are on, but something essential is missing. A child sits at the kitchen table doing homework while their parent moves through the rooms in a fog of worry, exhaustion, or grief. Nobody has asked this child how their day was. Nobody has noticed that they finished their homework without being reminded, that they quietly washed the dishes, that they put their younger sibling to bed without being asked. The child does not complain. The child does not cry. The child has learned, in the way that children learn the most important lessons, not through instruction but through repetition and necessity, that there is no room in this house for their needs. There is only room for theirs. And so the child becomes something no child should have to become: the strong one. This is not a story about bad parents. In most cases, the parents of these children love them deeply. They are simply overwhelmed, struggling with their own unprocessed pain, their own unmet needs, their own battles with mental health, financial stress, illness, or grief. They are not cruel. They are absent in a way that is harder to name and harder to heal than cruelty, because it looks, from the outside, like a family that is holding together. And the reason it holds together is standing quietly in the corner, making sure everyone else is okay. Psychologists have a name for what happens to children who are placed in this role. It is called parentification. The term describes a dynamic in which the natural boundary between parent and child collapses, and the child begins to carry emotional or practical responsibilities that belong to the adult. There are two forms. Instrumental parentification involves the child taking on physical household duties: cooking, cleaning, managing younger siblings, handling finances. Emotional parentification goes deeper. It is the child who becomes their parent's confidant, emotional support, and psychological anchor. The child who listens to problems they are too young to hold. The child who learns to read the emotional temperature of every room before they have learned to read a book. Both forms share the same core injury. The child's own emotional development is placed on hold while they tend to everyone else's. There is a woman named Elena who grew up in a household shaped by her mother's severe depression. From the age of 8, Elena understood that her mother's moods were the weather system the entire family lived inside. On good days, there was laughter and warmth. On bad days, there was silence and an atmosphere so heavy it was difficult to breathe. Elena learned to watch for signs: a certain stillness in the morning, a particular way her mother held her coffee cup. She became extraordinarily skilled at reading other people's emotional states before they could articulate them themselves. She thought of this as simply being perceptive. It was not until her late 20s, sitting in a therapist's office, that she understood what she had actually been doing. She had been doing the emotional labor of managing her mother's psychological environment since she was a child. She had been strong because the alternative, allowing herself to need something, felt genuinely dangerous. This is the central wound of the child who becomes the strong one. It is not simply that they took on too much too young. It is that they learned at the deepest level that their own needs were a problem, a burden, something to be managed privately, suppressed efficiently, and never allowed to inconvenience the people around them. The lesson was not taught deliberately. It was absorbed through thousands of small moments where their distress was met with more distress, where their sadness created more weight in a room that was already too heavy, where reaching out produced not comfort but complication. And so they stopped reaching. They became self-sufficient not because they chose it, but because the alternative felt unbearable. The psychological consequences of this early adaptation follow these individuals far into adulthood. Research on parentification consistently identifies a cluster of patterns that appear in adult life long after the childhood circumstances that created them have passed. People who were the strong one as children often find it profoundly difficult to ask for help. Not merely uncomfortable, genuinely difficult in a way that produces real anxiety. Asking for help requires believing that your needs are legitimate, that someone else can be trusted to meet them, and that receiving care will not come with a cost. Children who grew up managing everyone else's needs rarely had the opportunity to build this belief. So they ask for nothing. They manage everything. and they quietly wonder why they feel so alone even when surrounded by people who care about them. There is a man named Thomas who has been described by every person in his life as the most reliable person they know. He shows up, he remembers, he helps without being asked. His friends call him when things fall apart because Thomas always knows what to do. What his friends do not know is that Thomas has not cried in front of another person since he was 11 years old. They do not know that when he is struggling, he disappears rather than reaching out, withdrawing into a private world of self-management that he has been living in since childhood. They do not know that the competence they admire was built on a foundation of learned self-erasure. Thomas does not share this because he would not know how. The language of emotional need is a language he was never taught to speak. This difficulty with vulnerability extends into intimate relationships in particularly painful ways. People who grew up as the strong one often attract partners who need them. The dynamic is familiar. The role is comfortable, even when it is exhausting. Being needed feels like being valued. And for someone who learned early that their worth was tied to their usefulness, this equation can feel like love, even when it is something more complicated. But the cost is high. A relationship in which one person is always strong and the other is always struggling is not a partnership. It is a continuation of a childhood pattern. And the person in the strong role often finds themselves, years into adulthood, still waiting for someone to ask how they are and actually mean it. Beneath the competence, beneath the reliability, beneath the carefully maintained exterior of someone who has everything under control, there is almost always a child who is still waiting to be seen. The psychological literature on this is consistent and striking. Adults who experienced emotional parentification in childhood show higher rates of anxiety, depression, and chronic stress, not because they are weak, but because they have been carrying weight that was never theirs to carry for far longer than any person should. The strength that others admire is real, but it was forged in conditions that no child should face, and it comes at a cost that is rarely visible from the outside. The relationship these individuals have with their own emotions is often one of management rather than experience. They are skilled at identifying what they feel. They are skilled at deciding that what they feel is not important right now. They have an internal hierarchy in which other people's needs consistently outrank their own, not because they believe this intellectually, but because it is written into them at a level that precedes thought. A friend calls in crisis, and they are present, capable, and calm. Their own crisis sits quietly in the background, waiting for a moment that never quite arrives. Recovery from this pattern is possible, but it requires something that feels almost counterintuitive to people who built their identity around strength. It requires learning to be weak, not in the sense of falling apart, but in the sense of allowing others in, allowing someone else to carry something, allowing a need to be expressed without immediately qualifying it, minimizing it, or apologizing for it. Therapists who work with adults who experience parentification often describe the early stages of this process as profoundly uncomfortable for their clients. The first time someone allows themselves to receive care without immediately deflecting it, without immediately turning the conversation back to the other person, without immediately reassuring everyone that they are fine, it can feel almost physically wrong. The nervous system has been organized around self-sufficiency for so long that dependence of any kind registers as threat. But something shifts. Slowly, with repetition and with the experience of being received rather than managed, the nervous system begins to update its understanding of what safety means. It begins to learn that need does not equal burden, that asking for help does not equal weakness, that being cared for does not equal loss of control. These are lessons that most people absorb naturally in childhood, through consistent experiences of having their needs met without consequence. For the child who became the strong one, these lessons arrive late. But they can still arrive. The people who were the strong one in their families carry something remarkable inside them, a capacity for empathy that was forged through years of attending carefully to the emotional lives of others, a resilience that is genuine and hard-won, a loyalty and reliability that the people in their lives have come to depend on in ways they may not fully appreciate. These are real gifts, even if they came from difficult places. The work is not to dismantle the strength. It is to make room beside it for something that was never allowed to exist: the permission to need, the permission to rest, the permission to finally, after all this time, let someone else be strong for a while. If you are the strong one, this is not a story that ends in the house where it began. The role you were given was not your fault. The needs you suppressed were never a burden. And the version of you that has been quietly waiting, the one who wanted to be held instead of holding, the one who needed comfort instead of providing it, that version of you has not disappeared. They have simply been waiting with the same patience they learned so long ago for the moment when it finally becomes safe to be seen.